So I have two stacks of documents in my office. One consists of last year's Federal Register, the Federal Register for 2013. Now, the Federal Register is the annual cumulative index of all regulations as they're proposed for notice and comment, and later as they're finalized.
Would, in layman's talk, that be the actual effects the bills would have?
Kind of, yes, but they're regulations, they're restrictions that executive branch agencies are entitled to put in place, many of which carry the full force of federal law, but they're delegated. In other words, the power to make those is delegated to executive branch bureaucrats who, however well-educated, well-intentioned, and hardworking the executive branch bureaucrats might be, they don't stand for election. They're just carrying out some kind of a broad directive by Congress.
Congress is abdicating its legislative and lawmaking powers to unelected bureaucrats. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, yes, by degrees, and by degrees and in lots and lots of increments, such that when you add up all the laws that give discretion to executive branch agencies, you had, for example, many hundreds of instances of delegation of regulatory authority in Obamacare. And you likewise had many hundreds of instances of delegation of authority in the Dodd-Frank Act a few years ago. You add those two bills up with all others that have been passed over the last 7 or 8 decades since Congress has started really taking this approach, and you get a lot of our law being made by executive branch bureaucrats. So you take that 80,000 pages from last year's Federal Register, you compare that to the other stack of documents in my office, which consists of all the laws passed by Congress last year. It's about 800 pages. 80,000 pages, roughly, in the Federal Register compared to 800 pages passed by Congress. The 80,000 page document, when stacked end to end, is about 10 feet tall. The 800 pages is only a few inches tall. So for every 1 page of law we pass, they pass 100. Now the problem with this is, number one, we are supposed to be making the law. The first clause of the first section of the first article of the Constitution says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All legislative powers means all power to make law. The power to make law is the power to prescribe rules which carry the force of government, which will be enforced by government. That means that we're supposed to be making laws, not lawmakers. Too often we're making lawmakers, and we're making lawmakers out of people who are not accountable to the government. These regulations, of which there are hundreds of thousands of pages in existence, collectively cost the American economy $2 trillion a year. That's what it costs to comply with all those regulations. This is according to a set of government studies that track these things, about $2 trillion a year. Now that's about 2/3 of what our income tax laws impose on our economy. And yet this is sort of a backdoor tax that most people don't see. A lot of people say, well, these costs are borne by big, wealthy corporations. In a sense, that's true, but really the people who pay for those are hardworking Americans. They're poor and middle class Americans who find that everything they purchase, goods and services, become more expensive as a result of that $2 trillion cost. They also find that they make less. They pay not only higher prices on goods and services, but they also pay those costs in terms of diminished wages and unemployment and underemployment. So this is a big problem.
Sure, but it's been a problem for a while, and it seems, even though that you control both houses of Congress now, it seems like an institutionalized problem. How is it that you can actually turn it around?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because it can be turned around. It's a complicated issue. It's built up over many decades. It has been created by Democrats and Republicans alike. Both parties have actively participated in this process of delegating a lot of legislative authority. But there is a relatively simple fix to it, or at least a relatively way to start fixing the problem. It involves passing a bill called the REINS Act, R-E-I-N-S. It stands for Regulations in Need of Scrutiny. Rand Paul is the sponsor of it in the Senate. I'm an original co-sponsor with him. It's passed the House of Representatives each year, every year for the last 3 years in a row, but has yet to receive a vote in the Senate. That needs to change. Here's what the REINS Act says. It says that for each of these new regulations that come out, if it's a major rule as defined by the Office of Management and Budget, based on its significant impact on the American economy, then the new regulation cannot take effect. It doesn't carry the force of law without it first being passed into law by the House and by the Senate and signed into law by the President. In other words, it reinvigorates the same legislative process created by the Constitution, where legislation is supposed to pass through the House and the Senate and be signed into law by the President. Then and only then does it become law. The reason that matters is because, as bright and hardworking and well-intentioned as our friends in the executive branch bureaucracies might be, they don't work for you. You can't fire them every 2 years, as is the case with representatives, or every 6 years, as is the case with senators. But you can fire your senators and your representatives. And so the ultimate decision-making authority needs to rest with people who are elected.